Keep careful watch over your conduct. Do not act like fools, but like wise men, make the most of every opportunity, for these are evil days. The actual Greek would be redeeming the time. I was reflecting yesterday on an old sundial. You may see now and again some of these around still, less in Ireland perhaps than in continental Europe, but they're there and they actually still function. Less here because there's less sun, but nevertheless they would. And they remind us that actually old Father Time wins. Baudelaire, I think it is, has a line on that one, le temps, qui gagne sans tricher, time, who wins without cheating. The bottom line is 1 second, and 1 second will determine all eternity, and it's our last. And then one sees things as they are. One sees whether has been very wise or very unwise in the use of these seconds, because there's no repeating a second ever. And some seconds have power over all seconds to be. They can be moments at which, for instance, we have a power to orientate future time and therefore history. There are here some young girls. They may one day find themselves in front of young men who will propose to them, and they can say yes or no to a course of history which will create a different pattern of life and indeed create life itself or not. There are also some here who may be now or later on in time being worked upon by another partner. And they too have power over that divine partner to say yes or no. And when it comes to that moment after death, they see how important that was or would have been. A priest at death, if he's been faithful, then is still a priest and will be for all eternity. It's stamped on his soul. He has done the maximum with time, especially if he's brought others with him into glory, which is what we think of on this day. Before coming on the altar, I was talking to a good missionary friend of mine. He's right now, before going back on the missions, still at Dalgan, Father Barry, a young, good, faithful missionary. He's here because his mother was dying. She is now dead. But I could see, as he was talking with a warm heart about going back to the missions, that he knew what it was about. And I mentioned to him that I'd lived with missionaries, both in Dublin, Dartry, and in Rome, with the Maryknoll missionaries. And he said straight away, we worked with them in Korea. And he added, good guys. Well, when I was living with these people, I would hear not just any table talk, but the real thing. What it meant to save a soul, to be a priest on the front line. And just casually, it would be straight away something very dramatic. I remember one time, young Father Tony, this was in Dublin, coming out with this. He was in bed in the village in Africa, and the phone went. The police said, come to the village centre. there's going to be an execution. And so he was called to absolve 10 young men. He heard what they had to say, and he knew they were all completely innocent. It was a drugs thing, but unfortunately they can sometimes deflect attention by getting innocent people, but that's another story. And then he turned away and he heard this tremendous thunder of bullets, and he looked again. There was blood everywhere, and the pillars were sawn in two by machine gun fire. So I realized what being a missionary was about, and I heard more of the same in Rome. Table talk, which would talk about hand-to-hand combat with the one who has possession of these dark areas of unevangelized terrain from time immemorial. And the good holy rector of the house, who was in his 80s, I think, would come out with things like this. Well, when you're down in Africa, the first evangelization is not like what is in Rome here. And he went on to explain, in Rome, there's a dense concentration of grace. At every corner, you've got the Holy Sacrifice. You've got hundreds upon hundreds of young priests all living in the same area. And although there's much sin, there's an awful lot of light as well. It's not the same when you come for the first time to a dark land. Why? And he was quite open about it, American though he was. The other guy doesn't let go of what he's always had. And so they've got to push him away. Witchcraft. These witch doctors had tremendous power over the village. They had preternatural power, but you know why? Give your services, and so your soul, to the dark side, and he'll answer immediately. And that, by the way, is the difference between a conjurer and a magician. A magician has power from the wrong side, a magus, at a price, which one day, of course, he'll have to pay. But for the time being, he's got power. Now, my friends, what is going on in our world, in Catholic countries? That dark power is on the way back. And right now, before our eyes, we can see the reconquest of lands of grace and faith. Halloween, the celebration of the dark. Satan enthroned and normalized. Talk, if you dare, in a classroom of children about hell, and you'll be reported to the headmaster and then to the bishop. You're frightening the children. Go into a supermarket and see hell advertised, and it's perfectly okay. I noticed that in Catholic Ireland, it's not All Saints that is now the civil holiday, but All Halloween. Interesting that in France, the Concordat with Napoleon kept Tous les Saints as a feast, respected also by law. It's also there in Italy and in Germany. In Ireland, we don't work on Halloween. It's too important. We are now hesitant about putting cribs and crucifixes in public places, but we may enthrone the ghost and all his entourage, the ugly, the violent, the aggressive. The language of where? It's not the antechamber of glory, I can tell you. And do you know, the founder of the now normalized Church of Satan, Anton LaVey, was an interesting character in his own right. However, when it came to his last moments, something happened. Somebody was with him who told the world afterwards. It went something like this. He was coming close to his last breath. Now, the last breath of a person is interesting. You may know that one thing that often happens is that the person, just before passing, opens his or her eyes and is not looking at you, but at something or someone that we can't see. What is that? Is it a divine presence, a saint, an angelic presence, members of the family? We're not quite sure, but we will know one day. But if they're in a state of grace, it's not sad. We hand them over to the Lord. And I had a friend who was doing theology with us at Bangor who was a nurse and worked a lot in a nursing home with her mother, who was the matron. And she had many, many deaths, and she calmly said, "Mine is the last face they look at before I hand them on to God." And many things happened at death, she would say. One person, her name was Lena. She was deaf and blind, but she had one friend, a brother. And he died. He was the only one who could communicate with her. The moment he died, and she didn't know it, her eyes opened, her blind eyes, and she was looking at some real person that couldn't be seen. The brother came for her, and she went with him into the beyond. It's all the last moment that opens the horizon of all moments. But this man, who had founded the Church of Satan, had another departure. Normally for a Satanist, it's a great victory because they're going to the one that they've served. They're going to his kingdom. What happened? He opened his eyes. And having seen something, he said, "Oh my, oh my, there's something wrong. There's something terribly, terribly wrong." And closed them and opened them to the other side. In between those two, we have the norm. Those who die in our hospitals, hygienically, all tubed up with the greatest possible care. My friends, missionary work is at every hospital bed. Missionary work is also at every table and every coffee break. Missionary work is everywhere you are, because right before you is a soul, an immortal gem who probably is not in a good place proportionately. You are called to save souls, and a word from you also can change all eternity. Do you know that Old Nick knows how to hit hard? He knows how to get a soul. He looked for the weak chink and hit there. But also, he knows what favours his work. An atmosphere. An atmosphere. Some say that Lucifer was the angel of music. Whatever may be the case, he knows its power. And he knows that music will get the youth. So bit by bit, he will completely infest and infiltrate the whole world of music and lyrics. And if you dare to listen to some of them, you'll know what I mean. He is actually publicly glorified in some songs. What is the reason for such success given to some groups over so many years? Question mark. Yesterday, I was reflecting on this. Do you know that music is the language of beauty by rights? It's what we have in common with the angels, and we can heal each other even after our death by compositions. Create ugliness, and you're actually doing the work of Satan. I happen happened to pick up yesterday something I'd heard years ago. My brother would compose quietly in the bedroom next door. But in those days, the 60s and 70s, it was music and poetry. Now what have we? Ugliness and pain, thumping noises and cacophony, Satan ruling over all those machines in our shops and offices, even buses and trains, reigning over the years of the world. No peace, no pause, until 1 second after, when all is revealed and no one had a time to pause, because the fumes of hell had fuzzed up the air, the brain, and cobbled all the cells. The soul was not free to think or to breathe. So you too are missionaries, my friends. Don't be afraid to proclaim Jesus Christ to the soul right before you, who tomorrow may not be.